Hello and welcome to Chapter 21, America and World War II. We have got, my slides are off, no problem. We have got a lot to get through. I mean a lot, okay? So understand that things might be out of order. Some of the different classes were in different space. Just listen, pay attention. I'm gonna go fast, pause me, get your class notes by what I say. Let's go. We're talking about both what's going on at home and we're going to talk about the actual war. So starting at home, U.S. mobilizes resources, means our economy, our businesses, our corporations are making sure the United States is ready to fight. The U.S. government industry forges relationships to allocate resources effectively. What does that mean? It means that Ford stopped making a bunch of cars and started making a bunch of tanks. Okay, businesses retooled their peacetime to wartime production, and they did it at great speed. Also, rationing is going on. What does that mean? It means that if you want to have all the steak you can eat, you won't have all the steak you can eat. Instead, people were limited on what they could buy in terms of meat, sugar, eggs, oils, coffee, gasoline, and rubbers. Bottom line is rationing was used to maintain products for the war effort. Okay, people grew victory gardens. Thought of victory garden is that you grow your own food, and that way you don't eat all the food that the troops need. Okay, so understand rationing was used on the home front. Well, how did the war get paid for? It's a $300 billion war for the U.S. Income taxes were raised, but that wasn't going to be enough to completely pay for it. Also, war bonds were sold. It was very common to see posters just like this encouraging people to buy war bonds, which was basically a government IOU saying, hey, buy this, and in 5 years, it's going to be worth $100 more. It's a way to get money so that the United States could use it for the war. Okay. How about human resources? Well, a draft happens in 1940. Congress approves the Selective Service System, which is a draft to enlist people into the military. Interesting because the United States wasn't actually involved yet, but it was obvious that we were going to be involved. Okay, citizens volunteered in great numbers. Women also joined the military, but they did so in non-combat roles. The thought being is that if a woman could do a job that is non-combat, then the male who used to do that, well, he can now go in and fight. Okay, more women and minorities entered the labor force and gained access to wartime jobs. What do I mean by that? Well, if everybody's joining the military, that gives new opportunities to people that didn't have those opportunities in general, and those would be women and minorities. So understand that they had a better chance of getting a job. Okay, now women specifically, well, they got a sweet poster, Rosie the Riveters. This is the name for women that joined the workforce, especially working in factories that made weapons. Okay, Rosie the Riveters changed American attitudes towards women in the workplace. Used to be only a man could do that. Well, no, not anymore. We got Rosie the Riveter doing it. Okay, how about what's the media up to during World War II? Well, actually, Hollywood was helping out the war effort greatly. The OWI, the Office of War Information, stated if you are going to make something, make sure that it will help the Allied powers. Okay, that movies were made, such as this one you're seeing, The Great Dictator, to keep public morale high and to produce ad campaigns to keep Americans focused on the war effort. Entertainment industry published plays or pushed plays, movies, and shows that boosted morale and patriotic support for the war effort and portray the enemy in stereotypical ways. You can see this stereotypic image of Adolf Hitler, at least in the movie The Great Dictator. U.S. government also maintained strict censorship during the war. Okay, how about contributions of minorities to the war effort? African Americans in the military. Over 1.4 million African Americans served in World War II, and they mostly did it in non-combat roles. Now, they were segregated. The Army wouldn't desegregate until 1948, so they would be isolated and separated, and mostly in non-combat roles. In this image here, you can see them working in a role in cooking as a chef, or setting up as far as movement with ships or with trucks, but not on the front lines generally. Okay, let's not say that they're all all African Americans didn't serve, because some did, and we're going to get to them in a second. Many African Americans were not happy and demanded the right to serve in combat rather than in support roles. And like I said, some did serve in combat, and some served quite well. Most notably are the Tuskegee Airmen. The Tuskegee Airmen served with distinction as African American military units in Europe. Okay, so this is an Air Force, and by that I mean like a fighter pilot unit, consisted entirely of African Americans, the Tuskegee Airmen. Now, they won many awards and were considered to be some of the most outstanding fighter pilots during World War II. Okay, back home. Now we're going to shift. This is military. Let's shift back home. Because, like I said, because of all the war effort and all the people that were going to serve in the military, jobs open, and many African Americans migrated away from the South to the North and out West to get jobs in war plants. That's all part of that great migration that we talked about last chapter, okay, or last unit, I should say, okay? Good. Also, I don't have a slide for them, but look at your class notes. Mexican Americans fought in World War II, and they fought in integrated units. All right, minority units suffered high casualties and won numerous unit citations and individual medals for bravery. Another important thing that's going on as far as minorities is the Japanese internment. There was a fear that Japanese Americans would help the Japanese Empire, both by spying, and then the other factor was the prejudice against the Japanese. So, in 1942, President Roosevelt signs an executive order which allowed the War Department to declare parts of the U.S. military zones and remove people who were viewed as threats. Well, Japanese Americans on the West Coast were relocated to internment camps throughout the war. Some Japanese did protest, such as the case of Korematsu versus the United States. This was a Supreme Court case to see if it was okay for this internment to happen. The Supreme Court upheld the government's right to act against Japanese Americans living on the West Coast. Now, despite the fact that the internment is happening, there were still many Japanese that fought in World War II. They were called Nisei regiments, and they earned a high number of decorations. Some of the most decorated combat units in World War II were actually Japanese American soldiers, Nisei regiments. Okay, now the United States would apologize for the internment during the Reagan administration in the 80s. Financial payment was made to survivors. Okay, and that's home front. Let's go war. Hey, I get it. It's fast. But we just got to move. First, we got to have a strategy for how to win World War II. The Allied strategy in Europe is called defeat Hitler first, meaning let's put all of our resource to getting rid of Hitler. If we can get rid of Hitler, we can win this thing. In the Pacific, if you can look at this super premium map, you've got the Pacific Ocean that is dotted with islands. A strategy of island hopping will be taking over the islands, bringing the United States closer to Japan. And the closer you can get to Japan, the easier it is to fly planes to bomb Japan. So that's the idea. Island hopping and the Pacific, defeat Hitler first in Europe. Well, the Axis powers, they've got strategies as well. What was Hitler's strategy? Hitler hoped to knock out Great Britain first. Well, the problem was it didn't work out for him. Great Britain held up in the Battle of Britain, and then the United States got involved. Hitler had another great idea. Let's invade the Soviet Union. Let's fight a war on two fronts. Well, the plan was to defeat the Soviet Union quickly. Doesn't really happen. We'll talk about that in a second with the Battle of Stalingrad. What Japan wants to do, Japan wants to go ahead and grab those islands and assert their dominance in the Pacific Ocean. So the United States just says, hey, you guys, you have everything, you can control it. And then Japan might even go after the island of Hawaii. Okay, so Japan's trying to assert itself. Hitler is trying to go after Russia. How about some battles? Well, one of the first big battles is in April of 1942 for the Philippines, and the United States loses the Philippines. The United States soldiers on the island are forced to take part in the Bataan Death March. American prisoners of war were treated brutally by Japanese soldiers, and nearly 10,000 die on the 65-mile long stretch. Now that happens in April. But by the summer of 42, a great battle is going to happen, and that is the Battle of Midway. If the Japanese, and Midway is an island, if the Japanese had got the island of Midway, then they would have been able to make an attack on Hawaii. But they did not, largely because of very good intelligence. The United States was able to defeat the much larger Japanese force. It's called the Miracle of Midway. And once it happens, it is the turning point because the island hopping begins. Now, the United States can start jumping closer to Japan because they have got Midway. All right. Now this has to do the battle, two battles now, El Alamein and Stalingrad. El Alamein is actually between the British primarily and the Germans. The Germans wanted to seize Egypt and get the Suez Canal. They were looking for Middle Eastern oil supplies, but they were defeated by the British. Now what does this do? Well, it prevents Hitler from getting an access route to defeat the Soviet Union or to attack the Soviet Union from the south, and also to go into Italy with a military route. The key to El Alamein are the Middle Eastern oil supplies. Okay? What about Stalingrad? And the Battle of Stalingrad. This is all part of Hitler trying to invade Russia. Hitler and Stalin tell their troops, you guys are fighting to the death, and they did. At Stalingrad, some estimates say there was over 1 million casualties. No retreat. And the winter came in. And winters can be a little bit chilly in Russia. Stalingrad is the turning point in Hitler's invasion of Russia. Hundreds of thousands of German soldiers were killed in the Battle of Stalingrad. Stalingrad prevents Germany from seizing Soviet oil supplies and turns the tide against Germany. So there's oil in the Soviet Union as well that Germany could not get at Stalingrad. All right, let's get the United States involved. The United States' big landing happens in Normandy, France, D-Day, led by this guy, General Dwight Eisenhower. Smoked a lot of cigarettes, drank a lot of coffee. You saw that in class. D-Day marks the beginning of the Allied invasion. And what it says is that the liberation of Western Europe and defeat of Hitler, it is on. D-Day is the American turning point in the war. After D-Day, everything is going to go towards getting to Berlin and taking down Germany. Okay? And that is exactly what happens. May 7th, Germany surrenders to the Allies. The next day is declared VE Day, victory in Europe. But we have not won in Japan, have we? So let's go to Japan real quick. Let's talk about their intelligence. During the Pacific War, we used Navajo code talkers, and it was a great way to communicate. Basically, an American soldier who could speak Navajo would communicate our coordinates, our plans in Navajo. The Japanese could not break that language because it's oral, it's not written, and it's not very common. So Navajo code breakers were extremely important. Okay? Two very important battles, battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. This is all part of the island hopping. Okay? What you need to know about these battles is they were costly. The invasions cost thousands of American lives. Japanese soldiers fought so fiercely for every square inch of these miles, and they often would commit suicide rather than surrender. But we do get the islands, and getting the islands means closer to Japan, and getting close to Japan means bombing Japan. But to actually invade Japan is going to cost an unbelievable amount of lives. Some people assume that it would cost 2 million lives to actually go into Japan. This was part of the decision making that led now President Harry Truman, because Roosevelt is going to die of a stroke, to drop the atomic bombs. Hiroshima and Nagasaki are bombed. Truman says it was justified because of the casualties that would have happened to Americans and Japanese if there was an invasion of Japan. As it was, tens of thousands were killed in both cities. Well, shortly after the second bomb, is VJ Day, the victory in Japan. Japanese leaders surrender, avoiding the need for American forces to invade Japan. You have done it. Let's take a deep breath. One more video left. Why don't you check out chapter 22? Why don't you?